Okay, so we're going into the next episode 86 of the Friday Reporter. But today, what's super exciting is this is my first now ever repeat guest. And I'm talking to Reid Wilson today because he is getting ready to announce, or has been announcing, but is getting ready to launch Pluribus News as the founder and editor in chief. Reid Wilson, welcome back.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, so I'm really excited to get into it because I know you've been doing a lot behind the scenes. You guys have a great website up, you're hiring journalists, you're hiring freelancers. Like, talk to me a little bit about how this all came about. Like, what can you tell me about how this idea came to you and how you got started?
So I think we talked the last time about just how important it is, just how important public policy is from the state level.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a million publications that are covering the 535 people under the Capitol Dome and what, the things that happen in Congress, or the few things that happen in Congress. But there's no one publication that looks outside the Beltway, dedicates itself to looking outside the Beltway. And what happens in Sacramento or Albany or Austin today happens in 25 states next year, and then it happens, federally the year after that. Mm-hmm. Think about over the last 3 decades, welfare reform in the 1990s, Bill Clinton's signature issue. What was it? It was a project of 4 Republican governors in the Midwest, right? Mm-hmm. The Affordable Care Act under Obama started as Romney Care up in Massachusetts. Criminal justice reform, the one thing that Trump did in a bipartisan way, started out, if you can believe it, as a project of George Soros and the Koch brothers in Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. So often what happens in the states balloons out to other states, and then it goes to DC. And you can see these trends happening across state lines. And you sort of know that they're coming to other states next. And I use the example of Sacramento or Albany or Austin, but it doesn't, big ideas don't have to come from big states. The first legislature to legalize recreational pot was Vermont. And now like 5 other states, including your home state of New Jersey, have done the same thing, right? And so there are all these cool ideas that are coming out of state legislatures, and there's no one group that's covering them exclusively. And so that's what I've really been doing for the last decade. And I thought, why not expand this? I can only cover so many stories. Why not hire people to be, experts on healthcare in the states and energy and the environment in the states and disruption in the states? I think we're going to put together a really cool publication and tell that story of the puzzle pieces that are happening now that are going to add up to a big federal puzzle next year. The next version of welfare reform, the next version of the Affordable Care Act. Like, it's out there today. Yes. We just don't know which one it is.
And maybe you can even affect that, like accelerate that to some degree, because you're seeing it happen and you're reporting on it, and maybe people start to pay close. Anyway, with access to information, maybe people can make good decisions, and you can help move that along, right?
And like, look, there are 7,383 state legislators in America, and the vast majority of them, aside from California and occasionally New York, they're not full time. They're probably doing legislating as a second job or as a retirement project or something, and they don't have staff. They don't have permanent staff, at least, and so they don't have that structure that, say, a member of Congress does to learn about, issue X or issue Y. They're certainly not subject matter experts on everything. Mm-hmm. And so the way these legislators deal with that is they look to their analogies, which are to the states next door, the states across the country. When something passes in California, every other state looks at it. When something passes in Minnesota or Texas or Florida, some new idea, everybody sort of sits up and says, that's interesting. And then those ideas get imported across state lines. And so, I suppose our goal is really to provide the legislators with their next big idea, whether you're, a super liberal or super conservative or straight down the middle. You're looking for new ideas. Hey, we can help you find one.
Right. And so you talk about this 7,300, 7,383. That's a lot of legislators if you think about it, right? Do you see those guys as your sort of your target audience, as those Absolutely. Legislators for?
Yeah, no, we want, people ask, are you going to come with a conservative bent or a liberal bent? And like my answer to them is always, my core audience is elected officials who ran and won as Democrats or Republicans. So if I come to them with a conservative or liberal argument, they're not going to listen to me. Right. My only option is to basically point them to, hey, here's an idea that's come out of another state. and it may be a super conservative idea or a super liberal idea, or increasingly a bipartisan idea that they might take and tinker with and fit to their own state. I'll give you an example. California just passed a big bill on privacy that governs how companies like Facebook and Google and YouTube can use algorithms to target kids. It was sponsored or authored by an assemblywoman who represents Berkeley, like, probably a pretty liberal member of the assembly. I mean, I know her. She's one of the more liberal members of the California Assembly.
Sure.
But I also know the state representative in Minnesota who's a Republican who's going to introduce pretty much the same bill next year. So there, in this big fraught world of tech and how to regulate privacy, and it's becoming an increasingly partisan issue. Well, here's a Democrat and a Republican from two different states who both said, hey, look, here's something we can agree on. Kids and algorithms, like protecting kids from dangerous algorithms. Great. That's the low-hanging bipartisan fruit. Let's go do it. That's a great story. That's the story that I want to tell.
Yeah. And so as you get into those ideas and as you start to build, right? And you've been at this now for, I mean, it's launching, the Pluribus News will launch, you said early October, right?
October 3rd.
Okay, October 3. You have been in an aggressive hiring position, right? You're bringing a lot of people on. Tell me a little bit about how that process is going.
Oh man, yeah. So that was interesting. So we've hired 4 reporters and a managing editor, and then 2 folks on the business side, and they're all pretty senior people. I mean, people with long careers. Like, I hate to damn them with faint praise, but like people who are my age, my advanced age, and
older
so
than you.
Well, I know, but you don't look it. There are these are mid-career people, and so like.
Are they in DC? Or are they other places?
2 of them are in DC. 1 is in Colorado. 1 is in Washington State.
Cool.
And so they are like, I had to do this sales job with investors. I'm having to do sales jobs with advertisers, but I also had to sell the reporters too on like, hey, take a risk. Like, it's a startup, right? It's a risk. So take a risk. Here's my plan. Here's the money I've raised and what we've done. And come take a gamble on me. And they did. I mean, I think people saw the potential for this thing, the potential to have fun telling different kinds of stories, getting out of their comfort zone a little bit, and sort of invigorating themselves and doing something new and different that's not the same thing that they've been doing for years.
Yeah. And I love too that it looks like not only are you looking for full-time, but you're also looking for freelancers, folks that are in the States. That's an opportunity for folks that perhaps, because there has been so much change in the news coverage in the States, which is crazy to me. Are you finding that that's been a good resource, a good opportunity to pick some folks up?
It has been. I remember walking into the California State Capitol's press room for the first time with a buddy of mine from the Los Angeles Times, and looking around, and there's like a plaque, a brass plaque at every space that says the name of the outlet that's supposed to sit there. And I turned to my buddy and I said, where am I supposed to sit? Like, I write for the Washington Post. We don't have a space here. Yeah. He said, oh, sit wherever you want. 70% of these outlets either don't exist or don't send anybody to Sacramento anymore.
Oh, interesting.
Oh, that's not great. But, and that's the case in a lot of state capitals. News coverage is way down, but the reporters aren't gone. They're just doing something else. So this is like building this freelance network is a way that we can have a footprint in all of these states. And in a lot of cases with big name reporters who have, 10, 15-year reputations. Right. So if I need a profile of a prominent state house speaker who's rising to prominence, or if I need a write-up of some important bill that's probably going to be the model for other places, other states elsewhere, I can call a really veteran, seasoned reporter and say, hey, go figure out what's going on here. Write me a story, and I'll pay you, X number of dollars, and then we both win. That reporter gets a paycheck, and I get a really cool story from somebody who knows what they're talking about.
What's your point of view on the changing landscape of state papers? Do you have one? Because as you're building this, it must have crossed your mind that you're trying to find a way to sort of reinvigorate that, at least some of that has been lost by the loss of some of these papers.
Yeah, it is really sad to see. I mean, like, there's a natural, like, people retire and people move on and all that, but
Sure.
when a lot of the reporters who I grew up reading have retired, like, they're not getting replaced.
Mhm.
There's no new person who's coming in to do the state capital reporting. And this is entirely my bias, but I think that the state capital reporting is so hugely important, not just because of this sort of cross-border pollination that, like, what happens in one state is going to happen in another next year, but also because your state legislator has a bigger impact on your life, or can have a bigger impact on your life, than your member of Congress or your senator or even your president. Uh,
Mhm.
you know, think about your local school. Who pays most of the bills? That's the state and the city or the locality. It's not the feds.
Mhm.
Who pay you? When Congress passes a massive transportation bill, who spends the money on the projects? It's not Secretary Buttigieg or Transportation Committee Chairman DeFazio. No, it's your state representative who's pointing out the project in your street. I mean, I guess it's ironic. We were talking before we hit record that both of our streets are being repaved right now. That's
Oh,
a state thing.
progress.
Yeah, yeah, and
It is.
so, like, it's this weird um, sort of disconnect in politics that the more we pay attention, or rather the offices that we pay attention to the most are the ones that are actually most removed from us. And the
Yes.
ones that we should pay attention to the most, state
Mhm.
legislators, city council members, like, they're the ones who have the most influence in our lives.
Isn't that interesting? And it is. I think that that's lost on people too. I mean, it's really become, because the national news is what people are consuming. It's kind of lost on them how the process works. So this is, I mean, it's a great. I'm super excited for the launch. I'm super excited to get into it and see the work that you guys are covering, because I know it's going to be fantastic, because we've worked together for years, and you always, every time you put a good thought to paper, it always comes out great. So I'm excited about that.
I'll do what I can.
Tell me a little bit about, every publication has sort of an ebb and a flow in terms of, is it a newsletter? Is it a website? Is it talk to me a little, because obviously that's probably a big piece of what you're working on behind the scenes too. Tell me a little bit about Pluribus, what it's going to look like when it launches. What kinds of things can people look forward to?
Yeah, so we've got two sort of main products that we're launching. On October 3rd, we launch a free daily newsletter that will get you all caught up to speed on what you need to know that's happening in the States in 5 to 7 minutes. It's a quick read for
Great.
for those of your audience who are veteran enough, like you and I. Think of the hotline wake up call, the old
Okay.
hotline, like, that's my
Yeah.
model.
Okay.
I'm an old hotliner myself, and so are a couple of my staff writers. So we'll sort of channel that um,
I love that.
healthy degree of a sense of humor and not taking ourselves too seriously, while also getting you caught up on news you need to know right now.
Yeah.
The second product launches November 3rd, and it's what I'm calling a digital magazine, but it's really a fancy way to describe a curated newsletter that is going to deliver what my reporters are writing on, those trend stories across state lines, the interesting legislation that's coming up, the hot new topic that may be flaring up in one state that's going to go elsewhere.
Mhm.
And I mean, that goes out twice a week, beginning in October, in November 3rd.
Got it.
And eventually that'll become a subscriber product. But I mean, our real focus there is putting those puzzle pieces together across state lines. And it's going to go for free to all the state legislators and their staff, and eventually to subscribers who will pay some money for it, who are going to want to keep up with those sorts of trends that are happening across the country.
Mhm.
And those articles are drawn from what we publish on the website. And it's funny, I had an editor at the Post who, if I would write a story for the Sunday paper, he would edit it and then post it on Thursday online. And I'd be like,
Right.
what are you doing? Why, it's supposed to go in the Sunday paper. He said, come on, man, it's a digital first world. Just publish it. Like, just put it online. I thought, oh,
Yeah.
well, that's a smart way to think about it.
Yeah.
So those stories will be on the site, behind the paywall,
Mhm.
but we will still then be able to curate them and package them and send them to our subscribers, sort of highlight what we're doing this week.
Right. Right.
So,
And so, And you've got a good business team, because I know at least one of the people that you poached from another publication, a good friend of mine who I'm thrilled is going to be working with you. Tell her I said hi. But I am curious too, like as you guys start to think about that business piece, there's a lot now, I know. So like everything is moving at the same time. You're basically, I mean, you're launching a big brand new company. Will you consider state events, activities? I mean, I have to believe that that's another piece of that puzzle in terms of business development and other cool ideas that you'll come up with.
Yeah, and I think that's the important part of connecting and sort of promoting what these legislators are doing. I mean, we've all proved during the pandemic that we can do virtual events, and I can put together the speaker of the state house of Washington and Iowa and Florida in the same room, and
Yeah.
nobody has to fly across the country.
Isn't that
And we have
great?
a half an hour conversation about whatever policy those speakers are thinking about right now.
Yeah.
On the other hand, a cool thing we can do is like so all these legislators have different rhythms, right? And so in California, for example, the governor releases his preliminary budget in January, and then he and the legislature negotiate and sort of horse trade, and then they release a revised budget in May. And that May budget revision is always a huge moment in California politics. So I can imagine an event where we spotlight, Governor Newsom's proposals on X, Y, or Z, whatever it happens to be, with a live event in Sacramento that we invite all the legislators to and all the staff to. But then we've also got everybody, beamed in from elsewhere. That sort of hybrid event is a really attractive model too, because you get the best of both worlds. You get the in-person sort of touch that those in-person events bring, and you also just get the broader audience who are going to want to hear about the cool idea coming out of Sacramento or Albany or Austin.
You guys are going to be, you're also going to be a go-to resource for legislative, no, excuse me, for like legislative agents, for people that are government affairs types for various companies that have a big region, right? Where they have to cover 6 or 7 legislators, legislatures to see what's going on. You're going to be a go-to resource for these government affairs people too.
I hope so. And I mean, this is a point that somebody made to me the other day is like in modern business. Oh, sorry about the honking outside.
Right, my dog is barking too. It's all good. We're living our life here.
In modern business, unless you are the smallest of small businesses, you're doing business across state lines. Like you're in multiple jurisdictions. You're paying taxes, and I can tell you, I've registered for tax accounts in more states than I care to remember at the moment.
I bet.
But this is and so this is how modern lobbying and legislating works too.
Great.
You're not just looking at what's happening in your own backyard. You need to know where. I don't know, like I'm from Washington State. Boeing was one of the big companies out there. When I was growing up, they still have 80,000 employees in the Puget Sound area. Well, that's for putting together the airplane. Where does the wing come from? The wing comes from Kansas. Or wait, no, I think the fuselage comes from Kansas. So they got to put it on a train. And all right, well, that gets into Kansas manufacturing laws and labor laws. And so suddenly, labor relations in Kansas matter for working conditions in Washington State.
Sure.
And global supply chains are all connected and all of that. And so is global legislating almost. And so now suddenly you don't just need to know what's happening in your backyard or even your neighbor's backyard. You need to know what's happening in the backyard of the guys on the other side of the country.
For sure. Yeah. And that's the other thing too, because all of those legislatures have different rhythms, right? I mean, some, my home state of New Jersey, they call themselves a full-time legislature, but they're there, twice a week, throughout the year. Everything is different. So that's going to be also too, it's going to be a different rhythm for you as you guys are reporting as well. Unlike where, our inside the Beltway friends are covering Congress and when they're here in town, when they're not in town, we're paying attention to their midterms so it's a different rhythm, different cadence, but you've been at that for a while. I mean, you've been obviously when you were at the Hill, that was a big piece of what you were focused on. You were focused in the States yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, this is it. It's so interesting to see those different rhythms at play. I mean, California just in the last couple of weeks has done some really big policy stuff, 2 months before an election. Texas is in the second largest state in America. Their legislature is in for 3 months every 2 years. That's it. And then they're gone.
Wow.
And every now and then there will be a special session for a week or something like that. But
Mhm.
it's amazing. The second largest state in the country, and they just, whatever, they get their work done, and then they do, they prepare for stuff in the interim, and all of that. So yeah, every state has these different rhythms. Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, they're in all year round. Nevada's another state that only meets every other year. But I think it's crazy. And so
They are a little crazy. Yeah.
yeah,
But you're right. Some of these people have full-time jobs,
yep.
and this is something that they do as part of their life, right? I mean, this is kind of their volunteer gig.
Yeah.
Will you focus in on specific policy areas? Are there specific verticals that you guys are looking at in terms of, like, at least as you get started, are there different issues that you're focused in on?
Yeah, and I think this is how we're different from anybody who's tried this before. So in the past, people who have tried to cover legislatures exclusively have done it with a Sacramento person and a Tallahassee person and a Des Moines person, one person in every state capital. That's not how we're looking at this. We are looking at this through the lens of policy. So I have one healthcare reporter, and she is going to report on healthcare policy across the country. Now, that doesn't mean she's going to write about all 50 states every year, but
Right.
every year there are going to be 5 or 10 or 15 really interesting issues that come up that she's going to want to cover, because those are going to become the trend that everybody follows moving forward.
Sure. Mhm.
So we'll have somebody covering energy and the environment. We've got somebody covering the infrastructure and disruption, which I think is going to be absolutely fascinating. That's the privacy piece and the marijuana piece and the crypto piece, and all of this
All the new
crazy stuff
emerging.
that's going to happen.
Mhm.
Yeah, right. Emerging technologies. How do you even define them? And then we'll have somebody covering the economy, budgets, taxes, regulations, what I'm calling sort of the money bucket, the
Mhm.
way that these states make their money and regulate businesses who
Yeah.
obviously make their money for them. So
Talk.
those are the areas where we start, but states are so dynamic that there are obvious areas to grow. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, my next hires are going to be, an education reporter, a housing reporter.
Right. The issues that people are really that are closer to home, right?
Yeah,
That
yeah.
people are not getting from their national news.
Well, and that are so huge in the States. I mean, I was talking to I was doing an event a couple of weeks ago with a California Assemblywoman who deals with housing, and the Speaker of the West Virginia State House, who, and you can't imagine two more different people than a very liberal Democrat and a very rural conservative Republican. And the Assemblywoman started talking about housing, and the Speaker was like, well, we should talk about that, because there are the same issues popping up in West Virginia. So like, that's the cool thing, is that, it's, you think about housing and you think, oh, density and high rises, but it's also, just building housing for workers in rural areas too. And so that's the cool thing that I really love, when those kinds of conversations come out of two people who would otherwise never find a reason to talk.
Yeah, you're giving them an excuse to have a conversation about an issue that they can see eye to eye on. I love that.
Yeah.
Is there an interest or a desire to cover state races, or are you staying mostly in the policy space at this point?
So we'll cover what we can of the sort of gubernatorial contests,
Okay.
and we will keep track of changes in control of chambers. So, there are 99 legislative chambers across America. We'll keep track of who controls each of them. But, with 7,383 races over the course of a 3-year span in a lot of these countries, or a lot of these states, that's a little much to cover. Plus, I'm not sure there's a huge appetite for covering the 6th district of Idaho or whatever it happens to be. So we'll stick with the top level 30,000 foot
I
stuff.
I have to ask though, because you posed a question, a trivia question on Twitter at one point about there today are 7,383 legislators, but
Yeah.
in January there will be 7,386. Who's adding legislators?
Yeah, that's right. Wyoming is adding 1 senator and 2 representatives. So
Interesting.
this happens just about every redistricting year.
Is that because of population growth, or is that because why is
No, it's just the better way to organize a state. And Wyoming's pretty small anyway. I think they've only got 20 senators and 40 representatives, which, contrast that to the New Hampshire House of Representatives, which is 400 people. That's it's pretty small.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Well, I am super excited for you. I think that this is super fun. Thank you for coming back on the show to tell me about what you're doing. We will pay close attention. We will get everybody to pay attention and be reading and watching. Tell me, before I let you go, Is there someone that I should talk to? Another recommendation for a future guest?
Yeah, and I think this person has a nice nexus of experience in the states and experience at the federal level, and has the benefit of not being based here in DC. And it's Melanie Mason from the Los Angeles Times. I met her the first time. She was one of the two LA Times buddies I talked about when I walked in to that press room the first time. But I used to hang out with her and her colleague Chris McGarrian in Sacramento every time I went out there. Now she's based in LA and covers federal politics, and she is an absolute expert at everything she does. And it's interesting to see somebody's perspective from the West Coast, as opposed to being based here in the Beltway or anywhere else on the East Coast.
Right.
As a West Coast guy, I love that.
I love that too. Well, I'm going to tell her that you nominated her, and I'm so grateful for your time. I wish you all the best with your new venture. Pluribus News, ladies and gentlemen, pay attention. October 3, it gets started. Reid, thanks so much.
Hey, thanks a lot, Lisa. I appreciate it.